Hello and welcome to the 5th episode of Cyber Threats Exposed. I can't believe we got to 5, Steve. It's a podcast that rounds up all of the latest threat highlights from around Europe and beyond. Today we're going to talk about everything that happened of significance in the realm of cyberspace from June, as has been the case for the last 4 podcasts. I remain Tim West and I remain joined by Steve. Say hello.
Hi there.
Okay, that's more than enough pleasantries.
This podcast is brought to you in association with Jigsaw Business Networks, a proud WithSecure partner. Founded in 2004, JBN has established an ever-growing list of public and private sector customers across a range of key sectors. JBN manage accounts from start through to successful technology adoption, deployment, and ongoing remote support.
Let's get straight into the cyber threats. What happened of note in June, Steve?
Well, I think the big thing we'll lead in with is Kaspersky being banned from the US, which is quite major, really. So Kaspersky, the big Russian antivirus, cybersecurity company, founded by Eugene Kaspersky, who went to the Russian equivalent of Eton, i.e. the KGB, and then founded a big, valuable company. Apparently a lovely guy, I've heard. No, shade on him. But yes, the company has been banned from supplying cybersecurity products or services to the US. And as well as that, a couple of Kaspersky corporate entities have been added to a list of those who have cooperated with or supported Russian military and intelligence. There's a deadline for the ban, which is end of September. So people have got some time. If you're affected by the ban, that is, if you're in the US, you've got some time.
And just to clarify this, Steve, this is individual citizens running Kaspersky on their home PC, or businesses running Kaspersky as a...
Yep, anybody, in the US or to US persons. That's what the ban applies to. And it's worded as, afterwards, you can keep using Kaspersky, but you have to assume the full risk of doing so, which sounds kind of ominous, since we don't know what that risk is.
Well, why have they been banned? Why has the US taken this step, Steve?
Well, it's kind of hard to say. There's the possibility that it's a sort of there's the possibility that it is in response to something that we don't know about, like an unknown event of some kind. A recent one, obviously. I wouldn't expect this to be in response to something a few years ago. But it could be a kind of not very stealthy, but stealth-ish financial and industrial sanction against like the Russian high-tech economy. Because like Kaspersky are a huge employer of cybersecurity professionals. People rotate in and out between them and other employers, including the Russian government. So essentially, if you cut the money out of the high-tech industry in Russia, by banning them from working in the US, then that will have quite an impact on Russian high tech.
Yeah, possibly. And it's interesting you mentioned something that's happened quite recently, because Kaspersky there's been preventions on getting Kaspersky software in place in US government institutions for quite some time now. And when this news broke, I guess most threat intelligence professionals in the industry were immediately their minds went, or certainly mine did, went immediately to the shadow brokers incident, which to remind everybody was where a large leak from the National Security Agency, the NSA of the US, of offensive security tooling. I think offensive security tooling is a bit of a oxymoron. So cyber weapons, ultimately, there's no real need to beat around the bush there, was leaked, and it was posted by agents of the GRU, which is Russian military intelligence. And one of the leading theories as to how that was leaked was a shadow IT from a NSA contractor who took tooling and took these cyber weapons home with him to work on his personal computer, which had Kaspersky antivirus installed. These were detected, uploaded to Kaspersky systems, and then they found their way into the hands of Russian intelligence. So there's always been a mistrust of Kaspersky at high levels. So one does wonder whether this is just a development of that.
Yeah, it's quite the thing to develop two without something else. I mean, Kaspersky did say that they did, yes, they scanned and they got hold of this zip full of malicious software. But they said they deleted it. They didn't pass it to the Russian government. But then this is what kind of comes into that high-tech economy thing is, a company is made up of individuals. There's a revolving door between, high-tech companies and, intelligence services and so on, cybersecurity services or cyber offensive services. So there could well have been someone at Kaspersky who handed it over. So, a point that some people made was that Eugene Kaspersky hasn't been sanctioned amongst all of those Russian oligarchs who have and so on. Kaspersky, the corporate entity, has been.
So there's an institutional risk, I guess.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Just that closeness to the Russian government could be the issue.
Yeah. Interesting. Mm-hmm. I think the one kind of takeaway I think we can be really confident in is the US do not trust Kaspersky.
No.
Okay, cool. Well, let's move on. What else has happened?
So there's been a new MoveIt vulnerability, MoveIt transfer.
Another?
Yes, which we all remember with horror from last year, where there was a big 0-day campaign by Klopp, I believe.
Yeah.
And so new vulnerability, and Progress Software, who make MoveIt, disclosed this. And said,
what is MoveIt, Steve? Just
MoveIt transfers the managed file transfer solution for all of your secure file transfer needs. Basically, corporations have big piles of valuable data that they need to A, move around, and B, prove they've moved around, and do it in a secure fashion. And so this is a piece of software that you can use to do that. There you go. So hence it's a piece of software that contains the high value, important information of large corporations, which makes it a great thing to attack if you're a ransomware, data extortion actor.
And it's under attack again.
Well, yes, it is now under attack. Yes, it was initially Progress were like, it's fine, guys. We've told all of our customers, and everyone's been told they should patch. It's all good. And then about an hour after they published that, researchers at Watchtower published their analysis and their proof of concept about the vulnerability. Exploitation attempts began, because then there was, proof of concepts and so on lying around out there. And then shortly after that, Progress then updated their initial advisory, cranked up the severity of the vulnerability by 2 whole points on a 10-point scale, and stated that there was a third-party vulnerability that Watchtower had discovered in their proof of concept, which they had not been aware of,
right.
Which apparently took it from, bad to very bad.
I think we were in the same boat on this. As soon as we saw the vulnerability being released, it's quite obvious that ransomware actors are going to be particularly interested in it. And I don't think we actually know if it's ransomware actors this time around. But what we have seen, so it was ransomware actors back in the summer of 2023 who contributed to the single busiest month in ransomware's history, where hundreds of enterprise organizations had their MoveIt instances compromised and ransomed. And ever since then, secure file transfer services have been a real hot target for ransomware actors. We've seen ourselves, actors specifically, scanning for various brands and flavors of managed file transfer services, whether it's MoveIt or different brands. So as soon as this serious vulnerability was released, it came as no surprise that it was pretty much immediately exploited.
Yes, people were rubbing their hands in glee. Like I say, it's the perfect thing to go for, because it has to be outward facing, so you can transfer data between corporations, and the data it contains is important. And as well as that, people don't always move their data out of their external file transfer locations. You know, you get a big blob of data you've got to process in, you should really move it out of that transfer folder and put it somewhere safe. It appeared last summer that people were not doing that, and hence I think over 100 million people's data, or 100 million PII records, were stolen from these edge file transfer devices. So
secure your secure file transfer services, folks. And
the clue is in the name.
As ever, appreciating the company that we both work for. If it's got secure in the name, that does not inherently mean it is secure. It is secure for other reasons.
Exactly. That's the fact.
Cool. What else? What else has happened?
What else has happened? So Snowflake, the data warehousing SaaS provider, they have not been compromised, not necessarily, but 165 of their customers have been. Lots of them have had multiple terabytes of data stolen and leaked, including Santander Bank, Ticketmaster, Advanced Auto Parts, Lending Tree, and it appears Cylance, although that last one is a bit, maybe not. They strongly state they have not had any customer data compromised, but there's various indicators that suggest they have been. So, who knows? It's
certainly the year of the leak, isn't it?
Yes.
So how did this come about then? So Snowflake wasn't actually something I'd heard of until this case. I think, but it's also one of those services that's pretty ubiquitous. It's used by an awful lot of organizations. Unless you're actually particularly looking for that service, you might not know it's there. And they've been, Snowflake themselves haven't been targeted, you mentioned, but the users of the service have. So what's happened exactly?
So basically, it appears that someone went trawling through logins and credentials stolen by info stealers over the last however many years. And Snowflake domains are all something like snowflakecomputing.com. And you have a subdomain of your company.snowflakecomputing.com. So if you go and look at all these info stealer logs, you can search for Snowflake Computing and find logins for those environments, which is what it appears somebody's done to these 165 or so, or more, who knows, customers. So TechCrunch, some of their researchers went and had a look, and they found hundreds of logins. Obviously, they didn't try them. They don't know how many of those are legitimate and work, but I'd guess at least 165 of them did. And so technically Snowflake not compromised. Snowflake's customers' data that Snowflake holds compromised. And Snowflake have been very clear it's not them. They hired in Mandiant, and Mandiant went, yep, Snowflake, they're fine.
And CrowdStrike, I think they've recently concurred. So I think we can be quite confident that Snowflake themselves haven't been compromised yet.
Yes. They did say a demo account of theirs was compromised through some info stealer logs or something, but there wasn't anything in it. It was just like a demo customer thing. However, and this is kind of the rub, is that Snowflake accounts, multi-factor authentication was opt-in per user. So a whole organization couldn't turn it on. It was opt-in, so you had to go into the settings, say, yes, I want more security, so on and so forth. So all of those InfoSteal credentials just could get you straight in, unless someone had gone out of their way to turn on MFA. And kind of...
Which nobody does.
No, people don't.
Including me. It's, why would you want to add an extra step into an authentication process? I am being slightly tongue-in-cheek, but there are certainly accounts I own that I don't have multi-factor authentication on that I should.
And it's not about, and really, it's not even about the effort of having multi-factor authentication, which is pretty seamless, but the effort of wrestling with some random settings menu to find it and turn it on, and then maybe find out that they only support an authenticator that you don't already have installed, and so on and so forth. Make it easy, make security easy, please. But now Snowflake are requiring their customers to have MFA, and they have said that they have implemented or enabled a kind of auditing system so people can check that they, all of their users have MFA and stuff like that. But this also then tells us that previously there was no way of checking if your users were using MFA. It's a bit of an oversight.
So better late than never in that regard. Some people might say it's closing the door after the horse is bolted, but it's just another example of how good hygiene and really basic stuff can prevent, frankly, what is quite a catastrophic data leak. I mean, data on thousands of people across Europe and the UK.
I think millions. I think we've got a confirmation of millions of people.
Yeah, and it's in unknown hands. And the service was targeted specifically, as you mentioned. This is not just an opportunistic trying passwords. This is, right, we can see who is using Snowflake. We know Snowflake's default security controls aren't robust enough. It's a really important lesson, I think.
Absolutely. So yeah, that was Snowflake. We've got some other big numbers going on this month, as well as millions of people compromised there. Turns out that a Chinese APT compromised lots of Fortinet firewall devices using a vulnerability as a 0-day, so no one knew about it apart from them, for months, multiple months. And this has come from the Dutch military intelligence, who originally reported about it being exploited after the fact. But now they've looked in further and gone, yeah, no, actually they were doing it for ages beforehand. So 20,000 firewalls were compromised, and this was targeting Western governments, international organizations, defense sector companies, all the typical Chinese espionage targets. And one of the big issues, and the thing they've pointed out, is that the malware was basically a rootkit, so it could interfere with kind of actual system commands and so on being run, which means it can hide itself from commands that a defender can run. So it can persist through reboots, it can persist through firmware upgrades, and it may not actually be possible to tell if a device has been compromised. Because if you think about it, when you list the contents of a directory or list the running processes, you're asking a computer to tell you information about itself. And if someone has compromised it to the extent that they can change the information it sends you, then there's no way of trusting the information you get back. So they believe that actually, they being Dutch military intelligence, that these 20,000 devices, there's no reason to believe they're not all still compromised. So this is another case, a bit like the Barracuda email gateways last year, I think it was, where the only guaranteed remediation is to physically destroy the device. That's what it appears to be. I don't know if Fortinet have issued that advice, but Barracuda definitely did. So maybe fire up the wood chipper, guys.
I do think that the only guaranteed way of protecting any device is throwing it into a wood chipper, to be fair. If it needs to be used by a legitimate individual, then it can be used by a malicious one.
Yeah. I used to work for a company who had to destroy a bunch of servers, and they set up a live feed camera pointing at the server chipper. Oh, yeah. Very soothing after a day in IT support, I can tell you.
Well, I say that, but then, we learned in the last podcast, or the kind of the one before that from Miko, that the Xbox One has never been cracked. So maybe we have to start altering that advice to throw something into a wood chipper if you really want to secure it, or just move everything to Xbox.
Exactly. I mean, you have to put up with a lot of insults shouted by 11-year-olds, but you'd have a secure server.
That's true. Might even be better and preferable than having insults shouted at me from a 41-year-old. But anyway.
25. Thank you.
Sorry. Apologies. Okay, I mean, right. This is a vulnerability from 2022. I think we've kind of shined enough of a bit of maybe not enough, but we've shined a light on the problem that's arisen from exploitation of edge vulnerabilities and infrastructure services. It's really significant. It's being adopted by really capable intrusion sets and actors, and it's fast becoming the kind of primary source of ransomware infections as well. So it's one of another kind of quite shocking examples of how big an issue kind of securing your edge services and your internet facing services is. Go on then, what else is insecure?
So this one seems quite niche until we get to the end and actually look at the numbers. And that's CDK, who is a US SaaS supplier to specifically car dealerships. And car dealerships seems pretty niche and small fry in a way. But CDK have over 15,000 customers, and there's only 18,000-ish car dealerships in the US. So it's most of the US car dealers basically got completely cut off from all of their services. So they couldn't do payroll, they couldn't do financing, they couldn't sell anything, they couldn't order parts or manage inventory, their CRM, like everything gone. Obviously they could do it still pen and paper, and apparently they did, but everything was taken down, and it was down for a good couple of weeks at least. It's up now as we're talking, but it was down from 18th of June through past into June. And the thing about this is that this niche thing, car dealership full SaaS service. Why do we care? It turns out it's 1 to 2% of US GDP, so around $600 billion per year. So, quick bit of maths. If 85% of dealerships at a low estimate were affected, it's around $8 billion a week of business was interrupted and impacted. And even bearing in mind that, if, they'd be able to jot these things down and hopefully eventually run them through, the following month and so on. Estimates so far put it at about $700 million worth of impact.
I think the good news is it's probably not convinced people not to buy a new car. If people need a new car or want a new car, they're not going to go, well, there was a cyber attack, so looks like I'm sticking to my Ford Fiesta for another decade.
Indeed.
But so it probably should recover. I think the key thing for me is the fact that it's a US car dealership is relatively incidental. It's more, this could happen in any kind of interconnected industry where there are a small number of failure points of services that you would never even thought of, never even heard of, and it can cause such a big impact from the organizations and services that rely on them. And it's not just US car dealerships. It feels like
the health thing.
Yeah.
Like the US health, whatever, who their turnover wasn't, relatively speaking, that big, but the impact of them not functioning just interrupted everybody else.
And I guess it's probably unrealistic to expect a local car dealership in the US to perform drills around kind of third-party outages and disaster recovery. But it's not something that we just see in these niche sectors, unfortunately. And this is probably a good segue into the ransomware section. If we can talk about what happened in the UK ransomware space, where one company that, again, we'd never heard of because we are not operating within that field. Synovis was impacted, and it had a really marked knock-on impact, right? So do you want to just explain what happened there?
Yeah. So Synovis are a pathology labs supplier. They provide pathology services to 14, I believe, London hospitals. And they had a ransomware attack by Killin ransomware, and just a huge impact. So of data-wise, 300 million patient records were stolen. And in the end, 400 gigs of data was leaked by them. But in a real world, beyond that impact, immediate impact, 200 cancer operations were postponed. And the blood testing, which includes obviously testing for cancer and all of these other things, the capacity was only about 10% at one point. So 90% of blood tests were not happening or getting processed. So just a huge impact, like real world impact on people from this.
I think the response from the health sector was good and kind of mature. But it's another kind of stark reminder about the real world impact of ransomware and how interconnected these kind of services are, particularly in healthcare. And it's also another. What's interesting is if you go back kind of 18 months to 2 years, ransomware actors would actively prevent themselves from targeting healthcare institutions. And they would try and project this image of almost kind of charitable, almost this kind of charitable issue, this benevolent exterior. I mean, it's obviously a load of horse. I don't know if I could say that. You might have to bleep that out. But they would try and kind of project this view of themselves. Fast forward to today, ransomware actors don't seem to care anymore, which kind of tells me two things. One is that they only really care about their profits and not about the real world, the real life impact that they're having on people. And two, they are scumbags.
Yes, yeah. And you do wonder if this has come about because before they were trying to keep under that international law enforcement, line of interests, even being in, Russia or Commonwealth or independent states countries. There was some risk of them being valuable enough to hand over in return for something else, kind of thing. But now there's no chance of them being handed over by the Russian government to the US or whoever. So they don't need to keep under that. They just need to not get noticed by the Russian government.
Yeah, for now. But it's a good, it's a really good example of how geopolitical relationships and tensions and turmoil directly impacts the cybersecurity landscape, and that cybersecurity landscape directly impacts individuals like you or me.
Speaking of ransomware, as we are, obviously got the fun of talking about Lockbit this month.
Yeah. Every month. I've got a Lockbit section. It's just so entertaining. It's like a soap opera.
Dedicated Lockbit watchers, yeah. So they posted 9 victims this month, which is down 165 on last month. So I think that's the fewest they have ever posted, I believe.
Since we started tracking them as kind of Lockbit 3.0 back in 2023, it certainly is, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a big one. And they had this whole thing where the number of victims halved after the law enforcement action, then it halved again, then it spiked when the person behind Lockbit SUP was named, the kind of persona that runs Lockbit, and now it's just sort of fallen off a cliff, and that's actually pulled down the total for the month as well. So I think the lowest since February last year.
Yeah, when it's been relatively consistently beating. Every month kind of relatively consistently beats that same month in the previous years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Lockbit are just really difficult to predict at the moment, aren't they? And there has been huge impact from the law enforcement. The full extent to that we won't see yet, and we don't know yet. I think one thing is relatively clear though, and that's Lockbit is seeking to kind of regroup and reorganize and harden itself. The fluctuations in victims that they're posting is unpredictable. The changes they are making to their victims shaming sites or their data leak sites where they post their stolen data if people don't meet their extortion demands. And they're changing that. They're changing the address in the dark web. They're changing the technology they used to build it. And remember, they were compromised by a PHP vulnerability by law enforcement. So they'll be really keen to avoid that happening again. It does appear like they are licking their wounds, looking to regroup.
There was also a post on their Telegram channel claiming that the channel had been seized by the FBI, but that post was posted in broken English and it seems slightly unlikely. And they had the whole, they were posting test victims 12345.com and so on their leak site. And then they posted the US Federal Reserve, and people kind of assumed it was also just a, test victim or whatever. But that turned out to be Evolve Bank and Trust, who are a US kind of banking service provider.
Perfectly.
And it's there's no reason.
Yeah. it's a perfectly adequate victim to post, right?
Exactly. No reason to pretend about that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, the belief
Very
is it like did they not care, or did they not know, or?
Well, one interesting thing with Lockbit this month was the FBI releasing the kind of decryption keys for all of the data that they had claimed to have deleted. So,
yes.
I mean, this is not something that we are particularly shocked by. Stop the press. Ransomware actor can't be trusted. There's your headline. But you pay the ransom. They promise to tell you how they hacked you and to delete the data that they hold. And I don't know, they may tell you how they hacked you, but they're not deleting the data they held.
Yes.
And there's no
I
way
think that's
to
really
give that assurance. Yeah.
Like, people picked up on the whole, the FBI have got decryption keys thing. But the statement that they hadn't deleted the data, that's the biggest thing for me, because I've seen people say, you have to be able to, the ransomware groups have to ensure that they're in some way trustworthy. Otherwise, why would anyone pay, the ransom? So obviously they're deleting data. And that never kind of struck with me. No, they have to appear to be trustworthy. They don't actually have to be. No one's going around doing customer service surveys. They don't have a Trustpilot review or anything. So yeah, for it to just come out as a fact, Lockbit did not steal any data. There you go. So
yeah. Right, well, I'm gonna do my usual thing and not fall on the side around whether you should or shouldn't pay ransom demands. But it's really important that one thing you absolutely should do is go into those discussions with your eyes open and not take what they say as read.
No.
But I think that's enough about. I say that's enough about Lockbit. But Lockbit, I think, frankly, the law enforcement action against Lockbit is really driving a lot of change in the ransomware industry at the moment. And one of the things I noticed this month was just the amount of individual discrete ransomware as a service and ransomware brands that post victims to a public data leak site has decreased again. So there are the lowest amount of single groups posting victims this month, which seems to me that that affiliates are seeking to maybe more nomadic affiliates are seeking to work with
coalescing.
Yeah, well, coalescing around kind of more established brands, I guess. That we're in a contraction phase, not an expansion phase of ransomware variants.
Yeah, which sort of maybe suggests a confidence crisis, possibly, or looking for a safe harbor. I don't know.
Yeah, which is positive,
suggest
right?
a recovery. Might suggest a move back to more standard procedures instead of panicked running around, but I don't know.
In any way, it's positive, right? We want to disrupt these actors. We want to impose cost on them. We want to kind of keep them fleeing from safe harbor to safe harbor until there are no safe harbors left.
Hopefully so. Gosh, you sounded very, very Conan there. Well done. Not O'Brien, the Barbarian.
Conan the Barbarian. Oh, good, because that's who I try and channel.
I did wonder if team meetings were getting a bit weird recently.
I've often thought when you're trying to kind of adjudicate a meeting or do something that's kind of like a podcast or a chat between two professionals that people want to view in, Conan O'Brien's got it all wrong. Conan the Barbarian is where it needs to be.
No offense to either Conan there, because they're giants, both of them.
Okay.
Speaking of maybe a lack of new groups, there were still some, one of which, not a group, but a leak site. So somewhere people post data was a WikiLeaks V2. Now, it's kind of interesting that that's come up the month that Julian Assange was finally, I don't know whatever happened to him. Stuff happened to Julian Assange. Released, dropped, ejected, left, abandoned, whatever it was. Pushed out into the cold. Now, no suggestion that it's related to him, but it is a data leak site. It posts data leaked from other places. In this case, ransomware groups, which has a bit of a kind of overlap with WikiLeaks itself. And this is one of the locations that the data from Synovis, so the London hospital pathology people, was posted. The other being the Killing Ransomware's own leak site. So yeah, they had 11 posts this month.
We're tracking this as a ransomware leak site. I mean, probably it's probably closer to the truth to say this isn't a ransomware leak site, and some of the posts on WikiLeaks were found on other ransomware families leak sites, but there were a few that weren't seen anywhere else, which suggests it may have originated from a ransomware. It feels like it's originated from a ransomware. So we're currently tracking it as a ransomware leak site. Your mileage may vary. Some people may disagree, but we had to kind of make a decision on that. But it's quite interesting. It's quite an interesting new page. I don't necessarily think it's going to have the same kind of celebrity that WikiLeaks had, as is often the case with these relatively cheap pretenders, knockoffs. But we will see.
Now, might I suggest a drastic pivot to the European GDPR legislation?
Always like a conversation on GDPR.
Excellent. So the European Centre for Digital Rights, who are also known as NOIB, which stands for None of Your Business, has made complaints about Microsoft Education.
No, actually, tell me what it stands for.
NOIB?
Yeah.
None of your business.
No, I want to know, though.
Tim. And so the point is made. But they've made complaints about Microsoft Education and the Google Chrome Privacy Sandbox feature, which sounds like a wonderful feature. But it turns out that, at least according to the complaint, the Privacy Sandbox is actually just a tracking tool that's presented as a security feature. So what it does is it means that instead of all of the other advertisers tracking you, Google tracks you and then probably sells it on. So NOIB's complaint is that it presents itself as a privacy feature when it is not, and thus it does not seek the correct consent as to whether you want to enable it. One of those dark pattern things almost, where they just don't tell you what it is and go, oh yeah, this is a totally casual, cool thing between friends, just click OK. And on the Microsoft front, Microsoft Education is a service provided to schools, from primary school upwards. And it turns out that, according to NOIB's complaint, I've not checked this out myself, there's no information about what data it collects. As well as that, it installs cookies on devices without seeking consent first and uses them for user analytics. And it doesn't do this with regards to the user's age. So obviously if someone's under 13 or under 18 or whatever, they need to be treated differently. So the fact that this is Microsoft's educational offering, it's not like they don't know it's being used by people who are under the age of consent there. So those are the two complaints that have gone in, because GDPR requires specific, informed, unambiguous consent. And if you don't state what you're collecting the data for, then obviously you can't get consent for collecting it because you're not informing. And if you're not accurately describing what you're doing to somebody, i.e. calling it a privacy sandbox when it's a tracking sandbox, then you also can't seek consent. And I think it's kind of interesting that these two huge US companies, who are these central kind of planks of the industry, are kind of coming into conflict with GDPR here. Because there is that perception that, US companies have a different privacy ethos, shall we say.
Yeah, the more cynical amongst us will say US big tech doesn't care about privacy. Stop the press. But I think GDPR is, it can be frustrating for us in the field, but broadly it's a good thing, right? It protects the privacy of the citizens of the European Union.
Yes,
and the UK. I think we're still under GDPR, so
we are. Yep.
We like to think that the regulators there have some teeth. So it'd be interesting to see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Where are we going from here?
Cool. Well, I don't know how we're doing for time, Steve. So
we're a bit tight for it. Are we?
You know what?
We're being brief.
When we're tight for time, we put you on the clock, and we do highlights in brief. How many do we have? How many do we have in June? It sounds like we've got loads.
Only 8 to go.
8 to go.
As long as we're not including AI, and I don't want to.
No. Okay. Well, we've got 8 stories for the highlight and brief. As ever, Steve's going to do this on the clock with a with a countdown theme, high pressure. Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you prepared?
I'm good.
Have you practiced?
No.
Do you want to take a sip of water before you start?
No, I might need a wee.
Okay. In that case, go.
All right, so Microsoft have delayed the rollout of Recall, the much panned feature that would record everything you did and save it somewhere. It's going to be delayed. When it is rolled out, it will be opt-in preview functionality for the Windows Insider program instead of skipping all of that as they intended to do before. Now, we're not going to associate these two things, but the decision came the day after the president of Microsoft testified in front of the US Congress that Microsoft security failings were to blame for Chinese threat actors getting into the US government emails. Checkpoint VPN vulnerabilities are under active exploitation. Anything with the mobile access or IPsec VPN services enabled was vulnerable and began to get exploited a few days after the proof of concept was put out. Note that is the IPsec VPN, so the exact thing that the Norwegian NTSC told people to move to for security's sake. Whoops. Darkgate has posted a new version. This is a malware as a service that lots of people use, lots of bad people use for doing phishing and the like, and infecting people and stealing their stuff. It now uses auto hotkey instead of auto, which is a big change, and they've also cut out a lot of pieces of functionality. So all this adds together to make it seem like they are trying to make themselves harder to detect, doing fewer suspicious things, and then contributing to that cybersecurity arms race between attackers and defenders. GitLocker extortion campaign is where somebody's accessing GitHub repos, probably with stolen account credentials from info stealer dumps. They then delete the contents and leave essentially a ransomware note or ransom note saying, we've got a backup, pay us some money and we'll give it to you. There is a comprehensive proof of concept available for a new critical Veeam authentication bypass. I'm including this here because I find it funny and sad. It's an exploit that involves sending a VMware single sign-on token to Veeam. The token contains a request saying, please authenticate my user, and here is the single sign-on URL. Veeam will accept any URL. It doesn't have to be one that actually can give authority or authentication for this. So the attacker can send a URL to their own server. Veeam will go and ask the server, hey, should the attacker get access? And the attacker can go, yes. Not so good, guys. Next up, business email compromise. A town in Arlington, Massachusetts, that's in the US, obviously, had a $500,000 loss. Attackers got into the emails, watched what was going back and forth, then created a domain that impersonated a vendor and used this to request a change in payment method to electronic bank transfer. It took 4 months before the person who wasn't getting paid noticed they weren't getting paid, and in that time $450,000 was sent elsewhere. That's pretty lucky for them, as the total number of fraud attempts came to $5 million on there. So, that's bad. The TeamViewer corporate network has been hacked. They attribute this to the Russian APT-29. There's no evidence, they say, that the product or customer data was affected. But it's all a bit weird, and why did they say it was APT-29 straight away when normally it's the last thing you do is to attribute, I don't know, watch that space, something was coming out, I betcha. And finally, one I love but you don't need to know about is that smishing attackers, that's SMS phishing, created a DIY cell phone tower and used it to flood nearby devices with malicious text messages. So 2 people were arrested for this. That's the first prosecution of its kind in the UK for this particular thing. A DIY mast. Amazing. I'm just picturing like Johnny Five Alive style electronics everywhere. What does this tell us? Don't trust SMSs. And if this worked, then I'm sure we'll start seeing more of it elsewhere. And that's it.
I reckon that was just under the line of 2 minutes, Steve. I think possibly 1 minute, 59 seconds. Well done. I don't necessarily agree with you on the smishing. I think I agree it's interesting. I don't agree that nobody needs to know. I think it's a fascinating. Maybe I'm biased. I spent a good chunk of my last job working on SMS phishing, and it's really impactful. And with mobile phones being as a second form of authentication, and SMS based 2FA, which is better than no 2FA, or better than no multi-factor authentication.
Exactly.
Your messages are something you need to protect, and there's real cyber risk that's generated off the back of it. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with you with TeamViewer. I like to look on the optimistic side and think that the response from TeamViewer has been really good. They've been really transparent. And I think part of me think, and again, we are both going to have to wait and see to see if we're correct here, but I think the reason this blew out of proportion was because APT-29, a Russian SVR, as Seth was mentioned, not because this doesn't happen all of the time to organizations' test accounts get popped.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying I think it will get worse, but it's really interesting they led with that piece of information. Like, and they've not released any technical details. So are the technical details still sensitive in some way? Is there going to be something else that's, like some other compromise elsewhere or something? I don't know. But it's just not how it's normally done. And deviations from the norm are suspicious.
Okay. All right. Well, one thing I will mention as well, I think it's kind of one thing that I didn't know before I joined with Secure, and maybe our listeners across kind of Western Europe and Southern Europe might not be aware that Finland and Scandinavia as a whole kind of goes on holiday in July, which is why we are a week or so late recording this podcast. However,
yeah, Craig.
Yeah, producer Craig. But I will say there are a couple of stories I think we should kind of mention because they came out on the 1st of July. So they technically don't fall within the boundary for this podcast. However, people listening might think, our loyal fan might think, why haven't you mentioned, hi mum, why haven't you mentioned the regression vulnerability or Midnight Blizzard and Microsoft? So I think we will note these in kind of more detail next month. So I just wanted to kind of to highlight that.
Cool.
Before we kind of pull this to a close, I think there's been a ton of content. We haven't even covered the AI section, but I think in a nutshell, as services around artificial intelligence pop up like mushrooms in a humid, dark cave, they are not built. They are fueled by hype and not by security. And therefore, a lot of vulnerabilities in a lot of AI adjacent services. Perhaps we'll do a bit more of a deep dive into that in a subsequent podcast.
Yes.
Cool. In that case, I think I'll just hand over to our jingle writers to come up with an outro for us and a nice song, and say thanks for listening. Hopefully you found it informative, and thanks, Steve, for your insight.
Welcome. Thanks, Tim.
See you all in August.
Bye.
Bye.
This podcast was brought to you by Jigsaw Business Networks. For more information, visit jigsawbn.com.
I suspect Craig now wants us to do a riff.
I hope not. I've got house viewing in 12 minutes. So.
Oh, yeah? Are you selling or buying?
Well, we're going to go look at house, make tutting noises at it, and then leave again, probably.
I like doing that. I like looking at houses. I've got no intention of buying them. Just like nosing around.